let's just turn to Matthew chapter 14. We're going to look at a few verses here. We're going to be primarily out of Matthew 14. Not going to be jumping around too much, I don't think, today, but we'll see how we go for time. We should have my clock here, but anyway, we'll see how we go. Now, this story is interesting to me because preceding this story, just to give you a bit of a picture, we know that the ministry of Jesus was around about 3.5 years. This is about 18 months into Jesus' ministry. It's about halfway through Jesus' ministry. And what had happened just preceding this story was that John the Baptist had been imprisoned. And in the preceding chapters, Jesus had been teaching his disciples, ministering through parables to his disciples, particularly the apostles. And what interested me was the fact that here we are 18 months through the ministry of Jesus, and the central focus of his ministry had still only been to a select group of people. There were other people that were there, but they were there incidentally. They just happened to be there while he's talking to his disciples, ministering to them and teaching them the ways of God. These people were there basically, he hadn't actually determined to go out and actually preach this to the people in the cities until just before this. So what had happened was, an old story is that if you've got 7 days to chop down a tree, you sharpen the axe for 6 days. That's sort of an old adage. And that's what I think Jesus is getting at here as well. He spends an awful lot of time actually preparing the apostles to go out and preach the word. So in the preceding chapters, Jesus has been ministering through parables and so forth, and then he got the parables through to the apostles, given them interpretations of the parables, and they were starting to understand or grasp the concepts. This is in their physical mind, you see. And then he then says, okay, now let's go back to your cities. So he goes back, and just preceding this, Jesus just finds out that John the Baptist has been beheaded, and the people have been flocking to Jesus, and he's gathered them all together, and now he comes out and he's ministering to the people. And this, just before this, what we're reading here, is the feeding of the 5,000. So if you can just picture the event. Jesus has just found out John the Baptist, who's his cousin, has been beheaded, and Jesus' first reaction to that isn't to sort of go off and mourn the fact that John has been beheaded, but he says, okay, go and get all the people together, we're going to feed them. So the apostles then go and gather some bread and some fish, and then the amazing miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And we're approaching dinner time, so we're getting up towards sort of late afternoon, evening, dinner time, so people are hungry, so he feeds the people. Now, then we read in verse 22. And straight away, Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and to go before him to the other side while he sent the multitudes away. So Jesus was going to get rid of all these 5,000 people, tell them to go home, and he sent the apostles in the boat across the sea. And when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit," and they cried out for fear. But straightway Jesus spoke and said unto them, saying, "Be of good cheer, it is I, be not afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water." And he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him, and said unto him, "O thou of little faith, wherefore didst thou doubt?" And when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased. Then they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, "Of a truth thou art the Son of God." Now, I think we all have a bit of a mental picture of what's happened here. But I want to go just through this and look at it a little more closely in the spiritual light and just go verse by verse through it, because there's an awful lot in this about how we approach God. Because, bearing in mind here, Jesus has just been talking in parables, and the apostles were struggling to apply these physical representations in a spiritual way. Verse 22 again, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and go before him onto the other side while he sent the multitude away. Now, Jesus knew that they were going to be going into trouble, didn't he? He knew that they were going to be going out and there'd be a problem and they would get upset and be afraid. But in application, this is the same with us. See, one of the things that we struggle with is when we come to a point in our life when things don't go well, we forget that God sees around the corner and he sees into the future, and he knows that we're going to be in this situation. And oftentimes our prayer to God is, why have I got in this situation? Now, what possible good? I know myself, I've given testimony of this before. A lot of times when things have gone wrong for me, when I've looked at it logically, I think to myself, okay, the chances of this happening is maybe 1 in 100. And the 1 in 100 happens. And you think, hang on, I'm in the Lord. You know, I'm trying to do my best in the Lord here. And you'd think I'd have a bit of luck, you know. Those 1 in 100 things, you think the odds would go in our favour a little bit. But oftentimes, that's not the case. We go into situations where it just doesn't go our way. And we're in exactly the same situation here. What I'm getting at is that when we get put into a situation, the Lord is not doing it just to, to see how we go or how we fare through it. It's actually, that's the place where miracles happen. Because when things go wrong, that's when we in our faith go places that we don't normally go. That's the key thing to remember. And that's what he had been preparing the apostles for in all of the preceding chapters, was saying to them, when this event here is it's like the physical representation of him giving the example now of what he's been talking about. He's been talking for 3 or 4 chapters to the apostles, preparing them. And they're about to go and preach to the cities. But beforehand, he's just giving them now a physical representation of them, saying, okay, here is an example of not relying on physical circumstance to understand your circumstance, basically. He's saying, he's trying to get them to think spiritually. And what he's getting at here is, it's out in the middle of the sea when all the troubles are roaring around us, when things are turbulent and it's, things are going on. That's when that's miracle territory. So don't be afraid of it. Actually grab onto it and enjoy it, and rejoice in the middle of it. And it sounds really easy, but it's not. That's the tough thing about being in the Lord, is actually rejoicing in the middle of trial. Verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when evening was come, he was there alone. Now, I was reading this, and I was reading some commentaries on this, and a lot of commentators believe that Jesus went apart to pray because he was mourning the fact that John had died. But in the John account, it actually gives you a reason. He went up there because what had happened was, because he had just fed the 5,000 people, and because he had been given physical help to people, he was afraid that they would want to raise him up on a pedestal and try and shirk off the bondage of the Romans and shirk off the bondage of the Herod the king, and make him their king, physically. Because what had happened was, people had identified that this was the Messiah. And all the way through the Old Testament, there's hundreds of prophecies of the one day, the coming of the Messiah. But of all of the prophecies in the Old Testament, there's prophecies that say that he's going to come and be crucified and be he would die for our sins, a lamb to the slaughter, he'd be, his hands and his feet would be pierced, and all these sort of verses out of the Psalms that we read about. But there's also a lot of verses that say he's going to be king. He's going to come roaring out of Zion. He's going to be the King of Kings, and he's going to rule this world with a rod of iron. So there's all these scriptures in the Old Testament that in Jesus' time, they had moulded them all together, and their expectation was that when the Messiah came, he was going to come, and Israel, the nation, was going to become this incredible power again. So Jesus was always aware of this, and so when he went apart to pray, and sent the multitude away, because he didn't want to be lifted up, promoted himself to being a physical king. He wanted the attention to be on the spiritual. Remember, we've talked about this a lot of times. Remember when Jesus was there in front of Pilate, and Pilate wanted to release him, and the people said, no, crucify him. And because it was a special Sabbath day that they, on the Jewish calendar, they had to release somebody. So Pilate got the thought, well, maybe we'll just let him release Jesus, because he didn't want to see Jesus tried an innocent man. So he brought out Barabbas, who had been convicted of insurrection, because Barabbas was the person who was the leader of an insurgent group who was trying to shake off the Roman rule, and he'd been arrested, and they brought him out, and the people said, let him go. And that's an example of what people do, is they want physical deliverance. So what I'm getting at here is that as a fellowship, when we preach to people, people are not naturally attracted to spiritual things. They actually don't like it. It's not comfortable, because people in their heart of hearts are living in darkness. And the Bible says that when that light of the Word of God comes into people, it's not comfortable. It's upsetting. So if we're preaching the truth, then we're not going to see people coming in the hundreds of thousands in, just wanting to be part of this. If we're here and we're putting on a show, and it's all about placating people or attracting people in the physical, then we're going to see people come in all the time, but not for the right reasons. You know what I mean? Like if we put on a barbecue and give away free sausages, we're going to be packed out in here. If we're like Jesus, feeding the 5,000, now Jesus there is feeding people, and there's 5,000 of them. But the moment the food stops, they're out of here. So what Jesus is trying to get at here is it's not about giving people physical sustenance. It's about spiritual things. And he's preparing them. So here, Jesus has gone away now, and it's about evening. So it's around about 6, 7 o'clock at night. I'm trying to give you a picture of the timing here, and so you can understand all of the context of what he's saying here. In verse 24, but the ship was now in the midst of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. Now, this is the interesting bit to me. When it says in the midst of the sea, in the John account, it actually tells you how far it was out. It was about 6 or 7 kilometres out in the middle of the water. When you have this picture of Jesus walking the water, I'd always pictured him walking out from the beach and going about 100 metres off the shore and out to where the apostles are on the boat. You know what I mean? That was the mental picture I had. But we're talking about 6 or 7 kilometres. Can you imagine walking 6 or 7 kilometres out to the ocean? Well, Jesus would have been walking for quite a while. You know, it was not like 100 metres. We're talking around 6 or 7 kilometres out into the ocean where he's walked. And the waves, the further you go out, as you know, big waves, you know. And we already know earlier on the waves were contrary. It wasn't sort of smooth seas. So here we are, 6 or 7 kilometres out, and Jesus has gone to them walking on the water. Any wonder why the apostles were shocked to see somebody out there? You know what I mean? Verse 25, and in the 4th watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. Now, 4th watch is between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. So Jesus has now been praying up on the mountain for quite a while, and then walked to them. So in the interim, so all of this time, from when Jesus was praying in the evening to 3, maybe 4 in the morning, Jesus has been walking out to them. So he's been walking quite a while out in the water. And these guys are out in the water, and you know, they've been there for quite a while. It's not just a little while. Changes your perception when you understand the context, doesn't it? And verse 26, and when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a spirit, and they cried out for fear. And I can understand that. But straight away Jesus spoke unto them, saying, be of good cheer, it's I, be not afraid. Now, I don't know whether it was foggy or what, but Peter answered and said unto him, Lord, if it be thou. Now first, when you start a sentence with if, it doesn't exactly engender faith, does it? See, it's funny here. See, Jesus says to Peter later, thou of little faith. But Peter's the one who walked on the water. Now, if I walked on water, I'm walking around like this, like I walked on water. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. And it's not the case here. Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come unto thee on the water. And he said, come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. Now that's pretty impressive. But when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, beginning to sink. He cried, saying, Lord, save me. Now, what I'm getting at here is this is a story that, like Jesus had just been talking in parables, is like a parable. In our life, we're going to find moments when our life is shook to its core because of some situation that occurs. And Jesus has just given an example here that when these times come, don't worry, don't stress out, don't look to the physical, think about it spiritually. Jesus is there with us all the time. There's a scripture in, I think it's Psalm 24, or Psalm 26. It says that the Lord is our strength and our refuge, and He is a instrument. I have the word again. It'll come to me in a second. I'll remember it in a second. That's a very present help in the time of trouble. That's the word. Jesus is just like, that's what He's getting at. He's a very present help. And a very present help in the time of trouble. That's exactly how it is. The Lord is there, and we find ourselves in circumstances, and we sort of, in our logical mind, think, why are we here? So the Lord's saying, don't worry about that. He wants us actually to be in the same circumstances, the same trials and tribulations that people who aren't filled with the Holy Spirit go through. But we need to understand that when we're in the circumstance, that we are not subject to them. Because what He's giving to us, the Lord's trying to communicate to us who we are. And what the devil tries to do is try to make us think that we're not who we really are. See, we're going to be ruling and reigning with God forever. See, heaven is an all or nothing bet. It's not like there's different levels, It is, the Lord is training up a people who really do get the idea that God is God. We've been, over the last week or so, Sam more than me, on the internet talking to people who are evolutionists. And the thing that they can't grasp is the idea of God. How could God be, everywhere all at once? Or how could God have created the universe? If God appeared to us to try and tell us how He created the universe, we wouldn't understand the explanation. If He's God that is far above anything that we can comprehend. So getting caught up in this idea of needing some sort of explanation is just a waste of time. God doesn't even go there. He just says, believe it or not. If you don't want to believe it, that's all right. Go and do your thing. And that's it. He gives us a choice. That's the thing. If you think about it logically, imagine God on His own, and He wants to create a family. And He can do anything. Imagine you're God, and you can do absolutely anything. You can just think it, and it will appear. Nothing is beyond your reach. Nothing. Absolutely anything you want to imagine, it can happen. And you think to yourself, I would really love to have a family that loves me. How would you do that? You couldn't create robots. Could you just create people who just love you, like they've taken this sort of I love you pill out of Harry Potter? Like a love potion? How would God do it? No, he would do. I think he would give us free will. So that some would truly love him, some won't. So the cost really of having a family who loves him is the cost of having people who are evil. That's the cost. So given the cost, don't you think that whatever God's got in store is pretty amazing? If you think again, you imagine 1 billion years ago, whatever, you're God. And you think to yourself, I want a family. And you know what that means. If I create a human race and give them free will, with that free will is going to come greed and envy and strife and war and all of the bad things in the world. That's if I give free will. But free will also give love, kindness, charity and all these other good things that God cherishes, and that's what he wants. But he has to do that in order to have his family. It's a big cost. And I've said this, I remember before, I've said this many times. Imagine if every time a woman had a child, she had to have 10 miscarriages before she could have one baby. If that was normal, to the point where it was always the 10th one where you actually had the baby, but the previous 9 were always miscarriages. Because miscarriage is a devastating thing for a woman to go through. But if that was the path of the course, if that's what had to happen with everybody for the existence of our species, then that's what we would endure that. A lot of countries that's the case. So we would wait for it to happen. That's exactly the same scenario that God was presented with. He knew by free will that there'd be all this bad stuff that would come. But that was the only way in which to have a creation that loves him. So that's the price. That's why he sent his son to endure such a death, I think, because he had to come and show that it was only through going through that bad stuff that you could actually have that reward in you. So when we go through trials, it's like a little snippet. And let's be honest, in our day and society, the trials we go through do not compare, really, to some of the trials on earth today. Like here in Australia, we got it pretty good. On our worst day in our life is not really as bad as most people in this world have every day, is it? Most people in this world will go to bed tonight hungry or starving and be in a very, very bad situation, hungry and freezing cold. So we've got it pretty good. So this story here really speaks to me about in the midst of the sea, when all our troubles and everything, just stop, count to 10, realise that God has done all of this stuff to win us. So just chill out, just relax, just think about it. You know the scripture in Romans that said, if God, while we were yet sinners, God sent his son for the ungodly. While we were still sinners, how much more, now that we have come, will he now answer all of our prayers and do these things for us? How much more does he love us now? So when things are going wrong, think about what's going on inside of us. What faith is that bringing to the surface? What negative things, what unbelief is that getting rid of? Because here, Peter did nothing wrong. He just doubted for a second. I would doubt. But what was happening is that doubt was being extricated in the circumstance. But here's my point. This is the first time in the Gospels that the apostles realised that he is the Son of God. Up until this point, there was still uncertainty about who Jesus actually was. When I say uncertainty, they declared him to be the Messiah and the Christ and so forth. But they didn't actually get it until this point. That's why at the end of this chapter, when they say, well, in verse 31, further, verse 32, and when they were come into the ship, the wind ceased, and they that were in the ship came and worshipped him, saying, of a truth, thou art the Son of God. That's the first time that they actually got it. The only difference is Peter had got it earlier. He was the only difference. But he was the one who actually got out of the boat. Now, let's put that in today's situation. When we in our life are going through trials and tribulations, the people in the world outside are like an audience watching us very closely. And in the midst of our trial, when the seas are up and down, up and down, up and down, if we're able to maintain our joy through that, that says to people in the world, your God is God. Whoever you believe in, well, they might know we go to church. And I got people at work all the time that they know I go to church. And it's not when everything's rosy when that becomes apparent to them. When it becomes apparent is when things are going wrong in our life and things go wrong in their life. But the same things that make them just totally capitulate. When those things for us, we are just standing up and saying, yeah, I know that, I've lost everything, or, I've had sickness or death, or all these things happen to us, right? When these things happen, and we stand up in the middle of that and go, but you know what, I know that Jesus is with me, and I know that whatever this circumstance it is, God is going to bring out of that good things. The peaceable fruits of righteousness. God is going to bring things out of this circumstance that are absolutely gold. That becomes really, you might not be verbalising it, but if that's the way that you're carrying yourself in the Lord, then the people in the world, that's what sticks to them. It's not so much what, I don't remember anything that anybody ever said to me when I came along. Do you know the thing that really stuck out to me when I came to the Lord? It was the guy who actually brought me along. Now, I don't really mention this in my testimony too much, but I'd asked him about 2 weeks before I came along to tell a lie for me, to cover for me at work. And he said, no, I can't do that. And that just, I thought, that sucks, Not a big lie, And I told lies for him, so it got to me. Now, they witnessed to me lots of times. They tell me this because their perception is they spoke to me for 2 or 3 years, then I finally come along. My perception is they asked me to come to a meeting, I came along, and it was, totally different points of view here. I didn't even remember that they'd spoken to me about the Lord. But they remembered every conversation. They were keeping notes. But I didn't care. I was just trying to get out of work. So from their perspective, they'd been talking to me about the Lord for 2 or 3 years. And the only thing that really stuck out and that initiated change on my behalf was the fact that I'd asked this bloke to tell a lie for me and he wouldn't. And the penny dropped with me, not outwardly. I didn't sort of sit there and think, well, he's didn't lie for me, he must be really truthful. He must be the real deal. I didn't think like that or talk like that. But down deep, the penny dropped with me that this guy he believed what he believed. He was actually living it. And so, next time he spoke to me, it had a lot more potency. I thought, geez, this guy's the real deal. He's not one of these pretend Christians that you see every day. And this is what happens, you see. When the circumstances come, when we're out in the boat and things are going rocky and, bills are coming in and, you lost your job and everything's going wrong, you think, man, what's going on here? I'm supposed to be the Son of God and everything's going wrong. In the middle of all that, you can just sort of stand up and go, you know what, I don't care. Come on, mate, I don't care. I came into this world with nothing, I don't care what happens. Even if I'm living in my car, I'm still going to seek the Lord. John was saying the other day, I love one of my favourite verses, though you slay me, Lord, yet will I trust in you. I don't care what happens. I don't care what I've been down this road before. I've been nothing. So I don't care what happens. I'm just sticking with it. And whatever comes my way. I'm sticking with the Lord. And that's how the Lord wants us to be. That's what He's looking for. So when He created the human race and gave us free will, He gave us free will with the intent that some people will, no matter what comes their way, just stick with the Lord. That's what He wants. He wants stickability. Is that a word? But that's what this story's about. When our friends and family are watching us, when in the middle of the trials and tribulations we're rejoicing, that's what they're looking for. Okay, let's just go to Daniel chapter 3. We've looked at the water version, now we're going to look at the fire version. Same story. This is the same spiritual concept. Firstly, by water, and the second one is fire. Okay. Here is another story. This is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Chapter 3 and verse 10. Just remember while we're reading through this, the principles we just looked at in that previous story. Okay, Daniel 3 verse 10 says, Thou, O King, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falls not down and worships, that he shall be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Just hold there for a second. The golden image here is representative of what I would call towing the line with the world. In other words, when you go to work or when you go to school, the overarching drive from everybody is to be like me because I am good. So everybody gets together and does the same thing so they feel comfortable that they're all good. You know? That's what it is. I find it funny, I was watching on the news all these guys at Wynn Stadium voting, all the Blue Scope guys. And there's 4,000 of them, they're voting for things. And they all vote, and they all put their hand down, and no one votes. So there's 3,000 or 4,000 people agreeing for something, and not one will disagree with it. A really complex legislation, complex votes that they're having. And I think to myself, who's the poor sap who's going to put his hand up in the middle of all that and go to work next Monday? That's how it works. Nobody wants to be that one lone hand putting their hand up. And that's what happens. There's lots of people when Jesus was on trial that didn't want him to, that thought, no, this guy's innocent. Remember the guy who came out and said, no, hang on. He hadn't done nothing wrong to kill him. And they drowned him out, they yelled him down. And that's what happens. People just want us to toe the line. And that's what it's getting at here. What this story is about the world wanting us to be like them when we're not like them. We're different. Now, verse 12, sorry. And there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they brought these men before the king. Now, verse 14. Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do you not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? You know, this is exactly the scenario that we find ourselves. People want us to go down to the pub, have a beer with them, sit down, be like them, so that they can feel comfortable where they're at. They don't like the idea of us going to them and saying, Thus says the Lord. And that's by action. So there's nothing here that says these guys were overtly going out there saying to people, don't worship the golden image. They were by action just saying, we're not going to partake. And so this is enraged these guys. This is what the world's like. If you want to upset somebody, and I do this all the time at work, if you want to upset somebody, when they start telling them a rude joke, walk away. I upset the guys at work. One of them came out the other day and I was talking to him and he said, one of them came up to me and said, what's the service about this week, Reverend? And I started talking to him and another bloke said, this is my Bible, he comes out with a rude magazine. It wasn't his, but I didn't know that because I got it and I ripped it and threw it in the bin. I said, there's your Bible. And he goes, I stole mine. So I got him in trouble. But that's what we've got to stand up for the Lord. And that's what these guys are doing. They're standing up for the Lord and upsetting people. Also, like when I asked Al to lie for me, these actions on our part, they might seem little trivial things, but they do mean a lot to people. People in the world really do respond to it. It sinks in deep and it just can't get away. Because it's not what we say that works. It's not what we say. What we say just goes in one ear and out the other often. It's all about what we're doing that counts. That's why we can sit here and talk all day long. But if we're not behaving right in our lives, then it's all wasted. Because people hate hypocrisy, don't they? People just can't stand churches because churches are hypocrites. Say one thing on Sunday, get up dressed up in the Sunday best, and then go home and smack the wife around, and beat the kids, and carry on, and just no good, no good. We've got to walk the walk. Verse, where up to? Help me. Verse 14. Then Nebuchadnezzar spoke and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, do ye not serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready at the time that ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psaltery, the dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made, well, but if you worship not, you shall be cast the same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. What's that mean for us? How do we apply it? No one's going to throw me into a furnace. I might fall into one by accident, but whatever. I won't shut up. When we make a stand for the Lord, automatically we then are in this furnace where the drive for people to make us want to conform to the way people want to be, especially for the younger ones. As you become more social, because what happens is when you're younger, you're in a family environment, and it's all well and good for us to talk about the Lord and the Lord to be central in our discussions as a family group. But once you leave home and go into another social arena where the Lord, where they're saying to us, in effect, if you don't worship our gods, if you don't worship VB, if you don't worship footy, if you don't worship drugs, if you don't worship going out and going out and clubbing and stuff, then you're going to be put into the furnace of affliction. We're going to put pressure on you. We're going to put the blowtorch to the belly, and we're going to try and coerce you into being like us. Because whatever you're standing over there being a righteous Joe, then you're upsetting people because you're showing them what's wrong in your life. That's what Jesus did. When he walked around, just by his behaviour, he made the Pharisees so cranky because he was righteous. And whatever he was righteous and they were in darkness, that light was just exposing their darkness, and it made them uncomfortable. So the first thing they did was they thought, we're going to throw this Jesus in the middle of the fiery furnace and get rid of him. And that's what's going to happen to us all the time, every day. Now, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. I love the language, isn't it? It is a good language. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able. Notice they use capital G whenever they talk. The capital G, and they use the singular God. They're being very emphatic. They're saying, our God is able to help us out. Don't worry about that. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. Can you imagine having the audacity to say that to the king? No doubt. This wasn't like back in, this is not like our days where you're standing before a judge and the worst thing you can do is go contempt of court. You know, if the king said, okay, go over and chop their hands off, you know, they'd walk over and just off with their hands, you know. So these guys are pretty audacious when they're standing up before the king saying, well, you can do that, king, but our God's able to deliver us from the fiery furnace and also from your hand if he wants. And verse 20, and he commanded the most mighty men, verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
You missed the best bit.
Did I? Did I miss the verse
Verse
today?
18.
Oh, verse 18. Thank you. It is the best bit, isn't it? I've got it bolded, highlighted here. How did I miss that? But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. See, that's why we get married kids. Because the wives pick up on everything we miss. And the amount of stuff that we miss, men miss lots. You see, it's been proven by science that women's jaws are twice as strong as men's. Because women talk twice as much. So over the space of a lifetime, the wear on the jaw is twice as much.
What does that got to do with you missing a very substantial...
Because the reason for why women talk twice as much is because men have to be told things twice. So you get it? I should be a comedian. Alright, but be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. That's the stand we've got to take. When people come and ask us to do these things and partake with things, if we just placate them by sort of tenuously just ignoring it or whatever, that has some effect. But if we're actually outspoken, if we say, no, look, I serve God. I'm about my Father's business. I'm different. If we have the confidence in God to do that, then the effect on individuals is so strong. Because people out there, see, when I came to the Lord, when I first came along, everyone just mocked me. What they did was they come and grabbed me like the following week and took me to a 21st birthday. And they tried to hold me down and pour scotch in my mouth. Because it was really affronting to all my friends, because I'd grown up with all these kids, so they hated it. I'd never ever heard them speak a little word against God before this, but all of a sudden, because all of a sudden I didn't want to have anything to do with drinking and smoking in that world anymore, all of a sudden that was it. They were cranky and they were going to force me to drink, because whenever I wasn't drinking, that meant that they were wrong. So they were going to stop, they were going to hold me down. And this is what happens with people. If we are overt and say this, it's going to upset people. But what happened was, all of those people responded. Because deep down inside, at 2 o'clock in the morning when they're sitting there in bed asleep, or they can't sleep, everybody, everywhere, knows that God's true. Everyone believes in God. This idea that there's people out there are atheists, I don't believe that for a second. I guarantee you that if I hold you underwater for 2 minutes, you're not thinking about food, you're not thinking about anything else, you're thinking about God, you're thinking about who you're going to wake up in front of. Everybody believes in God. And it's only the immaturity and the sin that makes people try to convince themselves that they're not. I was the biggest atheist upon earth. But I'm telling you now, if I was seconds from death, I'm believing in God. The old saying, there were no atheists in the trenches. You know, everyone believes in God when their life's going on. Anyway, we're on verse 19. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spoke and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times hotter, 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So it was pretty fierce, this heat up. Now back in these times, by the way, furnaces that they used to have, the way that this used to work was they would have a big hole in the ground next to like a cliff face, and it would go down like this, and they would fuel the fire from on top, and they would put stuff in the front, and then it would be they would retrieve like molten metal and stuff out the front. Modern blast furnaces, you know, that type of furnaces go back, you know, a couple of thousand years. So if you can imagine, they just poured in heaps of accelerants, fire accelerants, to try and heat this furnace up. Then they've taken these guys to throw them into the middle of the furnace. And in doing so, we read the next verse here, and he commanded the most mighty men that were in his armies to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men that were bound in their coats and hosen and their hats and their garments were cast into the midst of the furnace. So that these mighty men had thrown these men into the middle of the furnace. Now, I work with hot metal. I work around 12, 1300 degrees Celsius all the time. You can't get within 3 or 4 metres without it really burning. And I'm talking like as you're walking near it, your clothes, all the moisture in your clothes is evaporating out and you see steam coming off yourself because all the moisture in your clothes is just evaporating. That's what it's like. So here's this furnace that they've heated up. Presumably, very, like 1500 plus degrees, it would have to be very, very hot. Now, verse 22. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the furnace was exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Here's another good point. The furnace, when we talk about the furnace as being the circumstances in your life, when you're making a stand for the Lord, that furnace that people want, that are put into you, they'll put you under pressure that they couldn't handle themselves. See, when you're in the Lord, because people don't like it, because it shows the sin in their life and exposes their wickedness, they don't like you because of it. Family, friends, or whatever, there's something about you that irks them. And what it is, and they might not even know why, but what it is the fact that your righteousness is showing their sin. So, in effect, this is what the furnace is. But the same furnace, these people can't handle that anyway. And that's what's going on here. These are the strongest men in his army, and they die in the furnace. Spirit-filled people can handle the furnace, no problem. We have no excuse. Verse 23, and these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished and rose up in haste and spoke and said to his counsellors, did not we cast three men down into the furnace, or into the midst of the fire? And they answered and said unto the king, true, O king. And he answered and said, lo, I see four men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt, and the form of the fourth is like unto the Son of God. Now, how did Nebuchadnezzar know what the Son of God looked like? He wouldn't have had a clue what the Son of God looked like. So how can he make that statement? It doesn't seem to make any sense, does it? It seems out of place. The reason for that is because, like the other stories, remember the other story? That when in the middle of the trouble on the sea, in the water, and Jesus comes walking on top of the water, above the problems. Remember how that is a symbol of how when we in the midst of the trouble are able to rejoice in the Lord, that's when people can identify that our God is God, and that's when the apostles realised Jesus is the Son of God. The same thing's happening here. The same kind of concept. In the midst of the fiery furnace, when we're able to rejoice in the middle of that, that is proof positive to people in the world, our friends and our family, that our God is God. That this isn't just a religious show, that we're not holier than thou people. It's not about us trying to be holier than thou and going to people and look how good I am or whatever. That's just self-promotion and pride. That's just as bad as sin. It's as bad as anything, like if we're walking around here going, look how good I am, then we're no better than anybody else. That's not the intent. The intent is we love the Lord, and the Lord's the one who does it, and does all the good things in our life. And what Nebuchadnezzar is identifying here is that their God is God. That's what I'm getting at here. He's saying, like, remember at the beginning he said, who is this God who's going to save you? When they said, look, our God will save us, he goes, who's this God who's going to save you? And they're just showing him now, in the middle of the fiery trial, our God is God. I think I'll just finish up in there's a lot more in the story, but we'll finish up in 1 Peter chapter 4. Time's getting on a bit. I just want to go through a little bit on the way. I just want to give you a bit of comparison of why these two stories stick out to me as being so similar. In the walking on the water, they were in the midst of the sea. In the fiery furnace, they were in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Jesus came walking on the sea. In this one, Jesus came walking with the other four in the midst of the fiery furnace. Peter walked on the water, and all four were walking. When they were coming to the ship, the wind ceased. The fire had no power, and not a hair on their head was singed. So they had no outward residue of having been through the trial. They were completely cleansed again. And as a result of it, in the water, the apostles said, "Of a truth thou art the Son of God," and Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged that their God is God. That's the process that occurs. Okay, 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing has happened unto you. But rejoice inasmuch as you are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, you may be glad also with exceeding joy. That's the point here. Out of the trial, out of going through these situations, the results of that individually is that our faith will be built up, will be strengthened, we love the Lord even more. But more importantly, for those people around us, is that they can see that your God is God. Because it's not religion, it's not church humanity, it is the power of God in us that is being showed forth through the Lord holding his hand out and pulling us out of trouble, actually rescuing us out of trouble. It will be obvious to me. And I think I'll just say amen there.